Mac. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another segment here on Project Purpose. For those of you who are new, we cover topics that relate to mental health, mental wellness, and education on a week by week basis. And today's topic of discussion is education, and we're continuing the conversation that we started earlier on this week around critical thinking. And I wanted to talk about just bridging the gap between what we learn in school and the ability to think critically, because there is a gap. And if we think that going to school is sufficient to be able to think critically, I can tell you there are people who graduate from university with degrees who haven't yet cultivated the ability to think critically. So it's just a false assumption, and it's a dangerous assumption to have, because you can think that you're equipped to navigate and to create impact and to provide informed decisions, but if you don't know what information you should be drawing on to create an informed decision, you have that false sense of confidence. And so rather than us walking around with a false sense of confidence, I want us to be able to evaluate ourselves where we are by way of our ability to think critically, and also bridge the gap, give ourselves the tools to be able to inform citizens and to make informed decisions that impact not just our own geographies and our own democracies, but the world around us, because we're becoming much more globalized. And I think that it's just so much more important, given that we have all of this information that we're being bombarded with. There's so much more exposure that we understand how to navigate in that information, so that we're not constantly feeling bombarded with things or trying to figure out or decipher, well, what do I believe? Who do I believe? And how do I make sure that the things that I align myself to are really in alignment with my own values, my own convictions? And how do I make sure that I'm not deceived, essentially, is what I'm drilling down to. Because I think the importance of critical thinking is to keep yourself from falling victim to deception, because a lot of what's happening in the digital era is misinformation, and misinformation has an angle, there's an intention, there's a motivation. And when information is free, there's always subliminal cost, right? Nothing is free in this life. So if there is information, we are surrounded by information that is free, then understand that the benefit of that freedom is that you fall in line and that you absorb that information, you take it as truth, and you don't think critically about it. But here I want to talk about just different ways that critical thinking translates. And so if you're someone who is very good at taking the input and providing the required output, if you're very good at aligning yourself to the expectations of others, like you know what it is that they expect and you can do exactly that, you're good at delivering, then I think that that is a great skill set that gives you the opportunity to demonstrate performance, and demonstrate performance in a way that people can qualify, can quantify, and cultivate a return on investment on, depending on your accuracy and your speed. And you're definitely going to get into the job market with that skill set. Now, where in the job market you find yourself, that's the question, because as we become more mature by way of AI and all of these different technologies that are going to support our economies or supplementing our economies, they supplement our economies by taking away the jobs that don't necessarily require thinking. And when you think about the jobs that don't require thinking, it's exactly those things. It's computing, and computing is not thinking. If you can take 1 plus 1 and make 2, we can make a computer do that. We don't need a person to do that necessarily. And what's great is a computer doesn't get tired. They're not going to feel so sleepy that one day 1 plus 1 looks like it could equal 3, right? And exhaustion can do that. It can create errors. There's a margin for error in human computation that we completely reduce to pretty much zero. We have a computer computing. And when we think about production, there's a lot of variables that come with production when it's like a man-made production line. Like now that we're able to create production lines that are completely automated, like we don't need to worry about like workplace accidents. We don't need to worry about occupational health hazards as much. Like we can just have computers do the dangerous work, which means that line of labor, and so sometimes we would consider to be that like the blue collared labor, that's being sort of edged out by the automation that we can have do it. And with the automation, what we also can do is we have quality control, we have quality assurance, we can make sure that we really minimize that deviation as much as possible, which is really hard to do with humans, right? So that means that you want to put yourself in a position where you are being retained as talent for what it is that humans do that computers can't. And that's think critically, right? That's taking unknown information, uncertain information, things that are ambiguous, things that aren't easily computable, and coming up with a solution that really does provide value. And the only way that you can do that is knowing how to think critically and knowing how to navigate volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And so I want to talk about some examples that highlight critical thinking for you to start getting you thinking about like, what is it that I need to do to really hone on these skills? Because I think a skill is something that we can learn intentionally or by accident. And I think life experience is going to teach us how to think critically about certain things, or to a certain degree. But if we find ourselves constantly at the beck and call of whatever information is in front of us, like someone says something and you immediately believe it, like you're quick to regurgitate it, you don't think critically about it, you don't know how you feel about the things that you are communicating to other people, you've just heard it, so for you, hearing it is enough for it to be true. You allow yourself to get like carried away by whatever the drama is of the day, like you don't give yourself the opportunity to get a sense of clarity by way of what could be true or not, then that's where thinking critically is going to help you. Like focusing on thinking critically is going to help you. And so for me, like I take a lot of distance, like when I hear different news and things that are being disseminated, like I want to think critically about it, which means I'm not going to allow myself to be caught up in centralized headlines. Like I want to be able to think very logically about whether or not this information, even if it's being shared, is of value. If this information is valuable, in what to what extent, by what extent am I going to allow this information to inform the decisions that I make that impact me, that impact my community, that impact my country or the global community at large? Like these are the questions that I ask myself when I'm presented with any information. And I ask myself these questions against the backdrop of, well, what do the people putting this information in front of me, what would they rather that I think? Like what would they rather my reaction be? And how do I distinguish my actual reaction from what I think this piece of information is trying to get out of me? And that's important to do because otherwise we're susceptible to manipulation. And remember, marketing is a form of manipulation. There's something that they want you to do when they market something to you. So if you don't know what it is that their intention is, then it's much harder for you to safeguard yourself against it. And hey, maybe you are aligned with their messaging. Maybe you do want to do exactly what they want you to do. And then in those cases, there's no issues. But if you don't know what's happening, but you still find yourself reacting and responding and not necessarily having a line of logic or a train of thought behind why you're acting or reacting a specific way, and that demonstrates a lack of critical thinking that you want to bridge the gap against. And so I want to give some examples of what critical thinking is. Number one, critical thinking is pattern recognition, and pattern recognition is so important just to survive the world around you. And I think a lot of us grow up in environments that are stable enough that we expect stability, but if you aren't someone who's constantly looking for patterns, and not in a way that is paranoid or that is hyper vigilant, but in a way where you recognize when there's something awry and you can maneuver and sort of navigate accordingly, that's thinking critically. And I think about some of the experiences that I've had in my life as an adult where it was the case that I was dealing with intimidation and with threats and with stalking, and I was able to survive those things because of my capacity to recognize patterns, because of my ability to observe the world around me and decide based on what input I was getting, like how I wanted to position myself against that. And that was based on being raised in the country, believe it or not, because I had been raised going camping, but not just going camping, like learning the skill sets of like surviving out in the wild, right? Or even my high school, I had told you previously that because of the amount of assaults and incidents that were happening against women, like my high school decided to turn physical education into a self-defense class. And I was taught how to physically defend myself if it was the case that I was under threat. But I was also taught like how to recognize when I was being targeted. Like all of these trainings or this information like really did cultivate for me the ability or the dexterity to deal with an uncertain, unpredictable environment. And if you don't know what to do when things become unpredictable, if you don't know how to respond, if you don't know how to protect yourself or safeguard yourself, then there's a gap there. There's something that you could easily give yourself the opportunity to develop so that you can survive in a VUCA world. And so I like to call this VUCA things because I think the digital era has introduced a lot of volatility, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of complexity and ambiguity, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we need to be fearful. It means that we need to skill up, right? We need to cultivate pattern recognition. We need to be able to make decisions on our own and not just align to the person who we think is cool, so we make the decisions that they tell us to make. Like you need to sit in your own thoughts, be comfortable in your own mind, and think to yourself, well, I need to make a decision here. Like what things should I be paying attention to that will help me make the right decision, and understanding that there are elements that are to be taken into consideration to be able to make a right decision. There are factors that you should be considering when you're considering a position, whether left or right, on any specific conversation, right? And if you don't know how to make a decision, like if you don't know what factors to take into consideration to help you decide what's best for you rather than choosing what's best for someone else, then that's a lack of critical thinking. Emotional Emotional regulation is also so important. And again, critical thinking is so coupled to survival. It's not even funny. And if you don't know how to regulate your emotions, if you don't know when to speak and when to not speak, if you don't know what to say and what not to say, depending on who you have in front of you, for the sake of your own survival, for the sake of self-preservation, understanding sort of the social context of things and how you want to position yourself for your own success in those social environments, then that also is a lack of critical thinking. A lot of people dismiss it as not having a filter, and I am someone who can be fairly unfiltered, but contextually so, because I understand that how we navigate in a social setting is really, really very important to our own survival, the survival of our own dreams, of our own visions, of the places that we want to go in life as well. I think that it's important that we recognize that social intelligence is a form of intelligence that requires critical thinking. And dismissing different, I guess, shortfalls in our social intelligence rather than focusing on developing them is neglecting developing critical thinking. Media literacy is so important. And so it's funny because in my professional writing degree, so I did my university degree, I did a double major specializing in professional communication. So professional writing with a focus on technical communications and cognitive neuroscience. And one of the things that we learned about was journalistic ethics. And part of that journalistic ethics course, we were taught that, media has a specific obligation to the public to enable the public by giving them information that allows them to make informed decisions as a citizen. So every news across the world understands its journalistic ethics, but we recognize that there's a huge gap because like these news agencies aren't autonomous, like they're owned by different, I guess, elitists and different, I guess, groups of individuals who aren't really interested in the ethics of journalism and giving people necessarily the information that they need in the way that they need it to be able to make effective decisions, because there's someone who wants you to make a specific decision, right? And so when I learned about journalistic ethics, especially this one around enabling citizens to make informed decisions as a citizen, especially when you're contributing to a democracy requires critical thinking to survive, right? Where we see an erosion of democracy is when we see an erosion of critical thinking. If people aren't informed to the same extent that they need to be, if they don't have the ability to recognize what is a threat and what isn't, if they're easily manipulated, if they're easily swayed, and understand that that's the baseline reason why democracies start to crumble. You can't have an authoritarian democracy with an educated population. If people know better, then they do better. But if people do not know better, if they are ignorant and they're ignorant of their own ignorance, then authoritarianism isn't able to rise, right? And so this is just social political philosophy. This isn't me pushing my specific agenda. This is me saying like a democracy, a free thinking government that is built by the people is only built by an informed population. It cannot be built or sustained by people who are ignorant on their own rights, ignorant to the rights of other people, ignorant by way of the rights and the values they want to uphold or how that translates in action. Like that kind of ignorance is very dangerous for democracies to survive. And bias awareness, like if you're not aware of your own unconscious bias, if you're not trying to dismantle your own unconscious bias for your own benefit, because being objective in your ability to see people in the world around you or cultivating a sense of inherent value of the people in the world around you will keep yourself from being victimized. Like if you're comfortable victimizing other people because of your bias, then understand that that bias will find a way to circle back against you because there's someone else carrying that bias against you. And it doesn't matter who you are in this world. There's always going to be a group of individuals who are biased against you. And if we're not always trying to deconstruct our bias and we're always acting and exacerbating situations by allowing ourselves to be driven by bias, then at some point that's going to come back and rear its ugly head at us. And sometimes we think that we're at such a level of superiority that everything rearing back against us is just improbable. But there needs to be balance. And I'm someone who believes that the universe is fundamentally about equilibrium, about balance. So you need to realize that balance means that what you put out there, it needs to come back to you. And that's to you within this generation or in the next generation. But there will be a pendulum swing, absolutely. And so knowing that, knowing what questions to ask, how to position yourself, how to support your own survival, your own dreams, your own ability to create impact in this life, that's all critical thinking is built on critical thinking. So I wanted to have a conversation on critical thinking. I want to have the conversation around like how well do you do these things? Like when you think about pattern recognition, when you think about media literacy, when you think about bias, when you think about decision making, emotional regulation, to what extent do you have do you have an idea of what these things are and you actually put these into practice on a day-to-day basis? To what extent do you think that these skill sets are aligned to critical thinking and want to align yourself to these skill sets to enable yourself to do better and to live better and to be more informed as a citizen in whatever geography you find yourself in. And so those are the questions that I want to leave you with. I would love to hear your response. I would love to keep the conversation going. I'm very big in education reform because I see this gap as an important gap that we want to bridge before we're sort of beyond repair. And while I think beyond repair is an extreme position to conceptualize, because we do have a lot more education now than we ever did, I think that we don't need to have such a degradation of education for it to become very problematic very quickly, because we are in a globalized digital era, right? The problem is manipulation. The problem is misinformation. The problem is not being able to decipher what's real from what isn't. And that's a problem that we can easily address, because with misinformation, we also have a wealth of information available to us, but we just need to be able to decipher it. We need to be able to decode that information so that we're giving ourselves the opportunity to understand better, right? And to create vision where there is volatility, to create understanding where there is uncertainty, to create clarity where there is complexity. I can't stress it enough that there are counter skills that we can cultivate that really enable us to thrive in a digital arena. And so these are the skills that we want to develop. And so we do have programs for children. I want you to check out our website, check out the programs that we offer. We offer leadership based on a premise that leadership competency in and of itself is built on 4 core concepts, which is building a sense of self concept, a sense of individuality, autonomy, self-efficacy, and compassion. We also are building adult programs, so give you the opportunity to cultivate the life skills to create a life of meaning, fulfillment, and alignment. So something for everyone in your family, something definitely for you. If you're still here, thank you so much for listening and for paying attention. And again, answer the question, for you, to what extent do you think critically, and how much development and what specific area that you need to cultivate, do you need to focus on for you to really bridge that gap? Because we all have, I think, a responsibility not just to bridge the gap for our children, but to bridge the gap for ourselves. And critical thinking is this evolving skill. There's never a mastery that is echelon of all masteries. It's something that you're mastering as life shifts and changes and evolves with you, right? It's a growth trajectory. It's a growth journey, definitely. And something that I think is definitely the supplement that we need to add on the layer that is our standard schooling system. I knock the schooling system quite a bit, but I think that I would rather pivot my discourse to focus on the schooling system is probably not going to change anytime soon, but how do we supplement it? How do we give ourselves the tools to do well and to thrive in a digital arena? So that's the thoughts that I want to leave you with. Thank you again, and I look forward to chatting with all of you very soon. We'll talk to you later.